Relational databases first came about in the 1970s thanks to work by an IBM researcher named Edgar Codd. His groundbreaking research resulted in an entirely new way to think about data storage, including notably the table, column, and row-based structures discussed in the previous section, as well as the idea of efficiently defining relationships through this concept called normalization. In fact, normalization has become such a crucial part of relational database development that we will return to it repeatedly throughout the remainder of this video. The work of Codd and other IBM researchers attracted quite a bit of attention, as you might imagine, including notably that of Larry Ellison, who subsequently went on to found Oracle. Ellison and his team went on to release the first commercial SQL database product, which was soon thereafter followed by competing products released by IBM, Sybase, and a number of other companies seeking to capitalize on this fledgling at the time but rapidly growing market. Fast forward to the 1990s, and with the rise of the web came thousands of new companies, the vast majority of whom were both cash and resource strapped. Fortunately, the web was also proving to be a fantastic new medium for open source minded individuals to distribute their software. As it happens, a small Swedish software company called TCX Data Consult AB came to the rescue of these companies by releasing onto the web the first version of a database they'd been working on for some time called MySQL. Although at the time it was relatively limited in its capabilities, this early version of MySQL was fast and it required little resources. Two traits which were certainly welcomed at the time with open arms by startups around the globe. Perhaps best of all, thanks to the company's decision to release MySQL under a GPL license, MySQL was freely available to anybody wishing to use MySQL to power their website or other product. Now, over the following years, MySQL continued adding features while its user base absolutely exploded. And in fact, by the time MySQL's parent company was purchased by Sun Microsystems in 2008 for an astounding $1 billion, Sun was subsequently purchased by Oracle, more than 100 million copies of MySQL had been downloaded, with 50,000 copies currently being downloaded daily. Companies such as Zappos, Continental Airlines, NASA, the United States Census Bureau, Nokia, and Wikipedia are just a few of the high-profile organizations which count among MySQL's many users. So the question is, why is MySQL grown to become such an overwhelmingly attractive choice for millions of developers around the globe? The remainder of this section will answer this question, but just to whet your appetite, let's highlight 5 features which I find particularly compelling. Although originally licensed exclusively under the GNU General Public License, or GPL, the MySQL developers soon realized that many developers desired to use MySQL in conjunction with a technology that wasn't compatible with the terms of the GPL. So for instance, you might wish to develop and distribute a MySQL-driven commercial application, but don't want to release the source code specific to your application, a requirement which, of course, would otherwise need to be followed in order to abide by the terms of the GPL. To suit this desire, MySQL is also available under a commercial license, which not only allows developers to integrate MySQL alongside commercial software, but also distribute MySQL to third parties. Purchasing a commercial license grants you additional benefits, ranging from varying levels of 24/7 customer support to the inclusion of additional products such as the MySQL Enterprise Monitor and MySQL Cluster Manager. Pricing for a commercial license, as you might imagine, varies widely and has changed somewhat in recent years, so rather than cite numbers which are potentially out of date by the time you watch this video, I'll instead suggest you check out mysql.com for the latest information. A further licensing variant, known as the Free and Open Source Software, or FOSS exception, was later introduced in order to allow developers to freely use MySQL in conjunction with other open source licenses which aren't compatible with the GPL. The most notable historical reason which comes to mind for this exception was to allow the PHP project to continue distributing a MySQL client library, which, previously licensed under the GPL, was in conflict with PHP's own PHP license. The FOSS exception essentially provides a workaround for distributing the library, which does not result in a violation of the GPL. Ultimately, it will be up to you to, of course, do your own investigation, notably by pursuing the licensing documentation found on the MySQL website. However, I can assure you, after years of using MySQL in a variety of capacities, that you will quickly settle upon an agreeable licensing solution for all but, let's call it, the most exotic of MySQL requirements. Now, the second great feature that MySQL offers is cross-platform support. For the sake of practicality, of course, while recording these videos, I'll be presenting MySQL's features from the perspective of, in my case, a Windows 7 user. However, MySQL has long been supported on practically every operating system out there, among them OS X, Linux, Solaris, and BSD. For this reason, it's commonplace for both Windows and Linux-oriented shared hosting providers to offer MySQL database services. Further, even if you ultimately desire to deploy a MySQL-backed web application with PHP, you'll generally have no problem whatsoever deploying the application on Windows because of MySQL's fantastic Windows compatibility. Now, anecdotally, I actually happen to run Ubuntu Linux as my primary operating system, yet have experienced no problems whatsoever translating that knowledge over to MySQL's Windows-based variant, precisely because the cross-operating system features are practically identical in almost every regard. Now, the third great feature that MySQL offers is universal support among programming languages. MySQL is supported by every mainstream programming language in use today, whether you want to use MySQL to power the back end of a website, a kiosk, or desktop application. It's almost a certainty that your programming language offers mature support for the language. Off the top of my head, these languages include C#, Ruby, PHP, Perl, Java, and Python. Later in this video, in fact, I'll talk in depth about MySQL's ability to interface with PHP in order to build powerful MySQL-backed web applications. Now, the fourth great feature is a shallow learning curve. Compared to many other comparable database solutions, and I can promise you over the years I've worked with them all, it is relatively easy to get started using MySQL. In fact, as you'll soon see, the longest step in the installation and configuration process is actually downloading the installer. Following completion of the installation process, it's possible to be logged into the MySQL server within just a few minutes, carrying out useful tasks such as creating databases, users, and adding data and things like that. The variety of clients certainly help you to explore MySQL's unfamiliar territory. So even if you're an advanced command line user, then MySQL's native command line client will make you feel right at home. If you prefer a desktop-based application, then MySQL Workbench's GUI-based interface will allow you to navigate a MySQL database and its various options with ease. If you like a web-based interface, then you're going to love PHPMyAdmin, which is an incredibly powerful open-source MySQL administrator, which you'll access through any web browser. So later in this video, I'll actually introduce you to all three of these powerful clients, and you can pick and choose. And in fact, you might actually like all three so much that you'll use them in conjunction with one another, as I do on a regular basis. In summary, following a pattern embraced by many other popular open source technologies, MySQL does not require new users to ramp up an enormous learning curve just to create and use a simple database. Instead, it keeps the learning curve incredibly shallow while still offering a seamless path for more advanced features to be used as the user grows in experience and confidence. So now the final great feature I'd like to talk about in regards to MySQL is its powerful security option. With news breaking almost daily about the latest online data theft incidents, Security, of course, is on your mind if you're seeking to adopt a new database solution. In fact, this topic is so important that later in the video, I'll devote an entire section to security. Fortunately, not only is MySQL's security model incredibly powerful, but it's very easy to understand. So perhaps the most visible example of MySQL's security model is its access privilege system. This system challenges connecting users on two levels. First, authenticating a user by comparing a combination of the user's network address, username, and password with a set of acceptable values. If the identity matches, the user is granted the ability to connect. As a further safeguard, every time an authenticated user attempts to perform some action in conjunction with the database, that action is compared with the user's privilege settings. If the user had previously been granted the desired privilege by the administrator, the action is carried out, otherwise it's denied. So what's nice about this feature is that it's highly granular, allowing you to restrict a particular user to only, for instance, retrieving data, or inserting and retrieving data, or perhaps only updating and retrieving data. You can even restrict a user to interacting with a specific database, or a specific table within a database, and even a specific column within a database table. In addition to this access privilege system, it's possible to secure MySQL in such a way that only SSL connections are allowed. You can also limit the number of simultaneous connections made by a specific account, and even throttle the number of queries and updates an account can perform per hour. So these are just a few features you can take advantage of to secure your data and database server in different ways. Now, I realize that's a lot to digest, but not to worry, we're going to come back to this at great length later in the video. So of course, developers need to understand that MySQL security features are pretty irrelevant if an attacker manages to gain control of an entire server. That aside, a properly secured database is going to go a long way towards clamping down on any possibilities of data damage or theft occurring as a result of a database-specific attack vector. So hopefully this brief introduction gave you a pretty good idea of not only MySQL's origins, but also why it has become such a desirable database solution for organizations large and small. So with that, let's jump right in and install MySQL. Although I hope all of the introductory information provided so far has been useful, admittedly, I'm pretty excited about the prospect of actually putting my hands on the keyboard and doing something, and would imagine you are too. So let's get our hands dirty by installing and configuring MySQL. MySQL is supported on all major platforms, including notably Windows, Linux, and Mac OS X. Although it's most commonly deployed on the Linux platform, the vast majority of users at least begin learning MySQL on the Windows platform. Even if the vast majority of MySQL-driven projects wind up deployed on another platform, notably Linux, the MySQL team nonetheless recognizes the popularity of developing MySQL-driven applications and websites on Windows. So they've put together a very slick Windows installer which guides users through both the installation and configuration steps. This installer has been continually refined over several years now, culminating in the recent release of a package called the MySQL installer for Windows. This installer is a significant improvement over the previous, in my opinion, in that not only does it include both the MySQL server and various client utilities, but it also offers an easy way to later check for and seamlessly install upgrades. You can obtain this installer by heading over to dev.mysql.com/downloads and clicking on the associated download link. Next, what you're going to want to do is scroll down, and presuming you're running Windows, of course, you're going to click the download button to initiate the download process. Now, at the time I shot this video, the package was pretty large, weighing in at about 185 megabytes. So even given a fast connection, this is going to take a few minutes to complete. After clicking the download button, you'll be prompted to either create a mysql.com account or log into an existing account. If you'd like to create an account, go ahead and stop the video and do so now. Otherwise, you can click the No Thanks link to choose a download mirror. I live in Columbus, Ohio, so the site has chosen a few locations which it believes will produce the fastest download for me. Now I'll just choose the link located at the top to begin the download process. Okay, so I've successfully downloaded the MySQL installer for Windows, and we'll begin the install process by double-clicking on the installer icon. Presuming you're running a recent version of Windows, you'll be prompted with the usual security warning, as is depicted here. So go ahead and click Run. At this point, you might receive an error message about needing to first install the .NET Framework. Now, at the time I recorded this video, version 4 was required. However, this, of course, may have changed over time. If you do receive this message, just head over to Microsoft.com to download and install the latest .NET Framework version. After completing installation, of course, you're going to want to return to this point in the video. It'll take just a few moments to ready the installer before you're again prompted to confirm installation by way of another security mechanism found in later versions of Windows. I'll go ahead and grant permission to install MySQL. And after a few more moments of configuration, you'll see the typical installer welcome screen. And here it is. So what we're going to want to do next is click Install MySQL Products to continue. First up is the license agreement. So if you remember from earlier in the video, MySQL is licensed under the GPL, unless you, of course, had purchased a commercial version from MySQL. So be sure to take time out at this point, or soon after you install MySQL, to fully understand the implications of using the GPL in conjunction with any future projects. For educational purposes, of course, installing and using MySQL on your local machine is perfectly fine. So go ahead and read through the license agreement if you'd like before accepting the terms. Press Next. Next, the installer is going to determine whether newer versions of various products made available through the installer are available. Now, presuming you just downloaded the installer from MySQL.com, you can safely skip this, even though the screen warns you not to do so here. Of course, if you downloaded an installer some time ago, but never actually completed installation, then I suggest either checking for updates or downloading the latest version of the installer from MySQL.com. So I'm going to go ahead and skip the check and click Next. Next, you'll be prompted to choose a setup type. As you can see here, 5 different types are available. However, at this time, it's almost a certainty you're going to want to choose the developer default, simply because it contains everything you need to continue working through this video. Now, if you're curious to know more about the different setup types, you can click on their names and read the setup type description located here before returning to the developer default setting. Also, you have the option of changing the installation and data paths here. This is where the MySQL software and the databases will be placed respectively. However, for development purposes, I suggest just leaving these set to the default locations. The next step is responsible for checking for additional software requirements. Now, you might recall earlier in this section, I mentioned the potential for an error message to appear regarding the need to install the .NET Framework. This is because the .NET Framework is required in part by MySQL to actually run the installer. But in this step, the installer is going to check for additional requirements, which in this case, at this point in time, is the Microsoft Visual C++ 2010 runtime. Now, I have both of these installed, so that explains why we're seeing 2 check marks next to each of their respective titles. If you don't have the Visual C++ 2010 runtime installed, or any other requirements which might at some later point in time appear in this list, the installer offers a very easy way to download and install each without leaving the installer. As it happens, if you don't have any of these requirements met, go ahead and complete the download and installation process before returning to this point in the video. Once done, go ahead and press Next to be taken to the first installation progress window. This window is going to confirm what is going to be installed. So as you can see, we're going to install the MySQL server, MySQL Workbench, which is a great desktop-based administration tool that you'll learn more about later in the video. a number of connectors for talking to different programming languages, the MySQL documentation, and some examples. So this is going to take a couple moments to complete. So what you're going to want to do is go ahead and press the execute button. You'll see the progress bars starting to appear alongside each piece of software being installed. So once this is complete, we will continue with the configuration process. Okay, this next screen signifies the start of the configuration process. This configuration overview screen basically just confirms what's to be configured, which is the MySQL server and various other samples and examples which are included with the installation package. So go ahead and click Next to continue. Now, I've always thought this was a pretty interesting part of the MySQL configuration process. In this step, you are asked to select the type of configuration which should be used in conjunction with the MySQL server you've just installed. You have three options: developer machine, server machine, and dedicated machine. The developer machine configuration consumes the least amount of memory because it's presumed you are using the laptop for a variety of different tasks and therefore don't want MySQL to be a memory hog. So for example, you might be developing MySQL applications on your laptop, but might also be running your code editor, Firefox, and your email client. The server machine configuration uses a medium amount of memory because it's assumed that the machine MySQL resides on is maybe a server, but that server might also be running other important services which require memory, such as the Apache web server. Finally, the dedicated machine configuration presumes MySQL is the only essential service running on the machine, meaning all available RAM should be used by MySQL in order to ensure maximum performance. Of course, at this point, it's almost a certainty you'll want to choose the developer machine setting, so go ahead and do so and click the Next button. Okay, so we're almost done, I promise. In this step, you are asked to confirm a few configuration settings, beginning with whether TCP/IP networking should be enabled for MySQL. Leaving this option enabled means it could conceivably be possible to connect to the MySQL server from another machine on your network, presuming, of course, that the network firewall is properly configured in such a way that allows this connection to be made, but also presuming that MySQL's security settings have been configured in such a way that allow this connection to be made from the outside world. Unless you have a specific reason for disabling this option, I suggest leaving it enabled because it will serve as a convenience down the road. Next, you're prompted to determine whether the MySQL server should be installed by way of a Windows service. Presuming you plan on using MySQL on a regular basis for the foreseeable future, I suggest leaving this enabled. Otherwise, you'll have to manually start the MySQL server every time you boot your machine, a task which I can guarantee from experience can quickly become rather tedious. Also, you have the option of changing the MySQL service name. By default, it's set to MySQL plus the current version number that the server's running, which in my case is 5.5. I suggest just leaving this as is unless you have a specific reason for changing it. Finally, and perhaps most importantly pertinent to this screen, you're prompted to define a MySQL root user password. I'll talk more about this root user later in the video. However, for the moment, just understand that it is the super user or administrator capable of performing every conceivable action ranging from creating and destroying databases to creating and destroying data to actually shutting down the MySQL server itself. So because it's such an important account, although you're not required to at this time, I strongly suggest creating a secure password, and you'll also want to confirm that password at this time. I suggest doing that here before moving on. Again, it's not required, but it's so important that I'm going to reiterate this matter later in the video and show you how to change the password via the command line. So I've gone ahead and I've defined my password. I'll press the Next button to continue to the next step, where we are shown a screen that gauges the progress of configuration. As you can see, the MySQL server has been configured. press Next to configure the rest of the examples and software. That'll take just a moment to complete. Once complete, press the Next button. Congratulations, you have just installed and configured your first MySQL server. At this point, as you can see, you have the option of copying an installation log file to your clipboard in case you'd like to review this later. So go ahead and do so if you'd like. Also, you have the option of starting the MySQL workbench after the installer closes. The MySQL workbench is an administration tool which we'll be using later in the video. You can open it up and take a look if you'd like. However, I suggest just going ahead and disabling that checkbox right now and press the Finish button to close the installer. Okay, so there's just one more configuration-related step we need to take care of before moving on to the next section. In later sections, we'll be using a few command line utilities which reside in MySQL's installation directory. And so for reasons of convenience, we'll want to add the location of these utilities to the system path. In doing so, you'll be able to execute these utilities from any location within your operating system without having to also specify the path, which can be quite lengthy. Now, updating the system path is going to vary slightly depending upon which version of Windows you're using. However, over the years, the specifics have only slightly changed, going all the way back to Windows 98, if I recall correctly. Therefore, even if you're using a version of Windows other than version 7, which I'm using now, I suggest following along with these instructions as they will likely be quite similar to the specific steps you'll need to take to update your own path. To set your system path, you're going to want to begin by clicking on the Start menu button. On the right, you should see a menu item titled Computer. Now right-click on the computer item, and within the context menu, you'll find an option called Properties. So go ahead and click on Properties, and a window containing various control panel settings will appear. On the left, again, this is Windows 7 specific, you'll find an option titled Advanced System Settings. Go ahead and click that option, and a window called System Properties will appear. Among many other operating system options, you'll find a button which contains your environment variables. So if you go ahead and click that button, a new dialog window will appear containing two sets of variables. One for the currently logged in user, and a second set which are pertinent to the operating system itself. If you scroll down within this second set, you'll find a variable called path. So what you'll want to do is highlight the path setting and click Edit. Here is where you are going to paste in or type in the path which leads up to the bin directory which resides within MySQL's installation directory. And again, this bin directory contains a variety of different command line utilities, and the reason why we're doing this is because we want to make it very convenient for us when we open the command line in later sections. We want to be able to just type the name of the application rather than the entire path and name of the application. So what you want to do is you want to tell Windows that you're going to start a new path setting. You're going to append a path setting to this path variable, and you do that by adding a semicolon. Next thing you do, you paste in or type in the path which contains the MySQL server software. If you recall from early on in the installation process, you had the opportunity of changing that server path. If you were paying particular attention, you noticed that it was being stored within a directory called MySQL found in program files. So as you can see here, C:/program files / and then within that MySQL directory is a hierarchy of other directories. Among them, and most importantly for this purpose, is this bin directory. So we've gone ahead and added that. I'll press OK, press OK again, and with the system path updated, we can close the system properties window and finally the control panel window. For those of you running a Mac, we're going to quickly go over how to install MySQL on your machine. Right now, we're at mysql.com/downloads/MySQL, and we're going to obtain the free community server version of MySQL. After clicking the main link, you're going to see the different versions available for Mac users. If you are using Snow Leopard or newer, and your processor is a Core 2 Duo or newer, you'll want the 64-bit version. We're also going to choose DMG. Users with older systems should select 32-bit. Now, you'll click download once you've found the right version, of course, but to save some time, we've already downloaded it and placed it right here on our desktop. If you open the DMG, you'll see that we have 3 installers, all for different elements of the MySQL installation. We're going to install the server itself. Click through the license agreements just as you would any other Mac program. So we'll install, authenticate. So I'll go ahead and type in my password. This is all pretty fast and it does most of the hard work, so we don't have to. The installer completes. We'll go ahead and proceed to the next step. Okay, go ahead and click close. Next, we will install the prefpane file to give you access to MySQL settings in your system preferences. So this is a nice and convenient way to access these preferences. We'll choose to install it for all users on the machine. Of course, if you're the only one who will be administrating MySQL, you could install it for your account. So again, we'll next want to go ahead and enter the password and authenticate. Now this little screen tells you that the server is running and also gives you the option to shut down the server and also to let MySQL start with the computer, which I recommend doing if you plan on using MySQL on a regular basis. If we close it and then open System Preferences, you'll see the window once again. So you can access this screen really anytime you want. Now that we've got MySQL installed, you can access your installation with the Mac terminal and go ahead and type cd/user/local and finally /mysql/bin//MySQL, and you've just entered the command line interface of the MySQL monitor. Many of the concepts presented throughout this video are illustrated using the Sakila sample database. The Sakila sample database is created and maintained by members of the MySQL documentation team, and it's intended to provide newcomers to MySQL with the opportunity to interact with a database that resembles something you might find in the real world, which in this case happens to be a video rental chain. Within this database, you'll find information about customers, about movies, actors, and other bits of data which you would expect to find within such a video rental chain. As it happens, I use version 0.8, which is the latest version of the Sakila database, throughout the video. This database is free to download, and you can do so by heading over to dev.mysql.com, and you'll be able to find installation instructions by clicking on the installation link. And here you'll find the link to the database and various other instructions for installing it. If you happen to download a newer version of the Sakila database, perhaps a Feature 0.9 or 1.0, that's fine, as the overwhelming majority of the concepts discussed will certainly apply equally well to that database. However, if you want the identical version of the database that I use, you can in fact download that from the MySQL website. Installing the Sakila sample database is a pretty easy process. Just head over to your favorite search engine, search for MySQL Sakila. The Sakila database is actually found under MySQL's documentation section because it's intended as a learning resource. So go ahead and click on the MySQL documentation link. Here you will find a number of different sample databases, including Sakila. Go ahead and download either the TGZ file or zip according to your operating system. If you're on Windows, you'll probably want to download the zip file. After the download completes, go ahead and unzip that file, and you'll be presented with 3 different files, including Sakila-data, Sakila-schema.sql, and Sakila.mwb. Now, this Sakila.mwb file is intended for use in conjunction with a great desktop utility called MySQL Workbench. However, for the moment, let's just focus on the other two files, which are again Sakila-data and Sakila-schema. The Sakila-schema file contains the various table structures that comprise the Sakila database, whereas the data file comprises the data. So in order to import the structure and data into your MySQL database, there are a number of different ways you can do this. One of the easiest involves using the MySQL client, passing in or importing the Sakila schema. So I'll go ahead, execute this command. Now, again, if you're not familiar with the MySQL client, this will all become much more apparent as you watch the later videos. But what we're doing here is basically importing this file into MySQL. So it's going to read all of the instructions in the SQL file. So I'll go ahead, import the schema. Now I'm going to run basically the same command again, this time running Sakila-data. Provide my password. This will take a minute as there's actually quite a bit of data in that database. And finally, to confirm that everything imported properly, I will log into Sakila database and just show tables. And sure enough, we see all of the tables which comprise the Sakila database.